Hey guys, I have a pretty serious video coming for you guys today. The title of this video is Witchcraft in the Church, and I want to share some things that I believe that God showed me. I encourage you to test all things. If there's anything I say that you disagree with, please come to me in a spirit of love. And that's all I can ask, guys. That we're here to help each other out. I want to share some things that happened to me that led me to this subject. And I also want to share some things that I believe that God showed me. So, I shared this story on another video, but I'm going to go ahead and share it again because it's very relevant to this subject matter. First of all, guys, witchcraft in the church can take many forms. It doesn't have to be actual whenever we think of witchcraft, guys, we think of Ouija boards, we think of satanic things that are satanic, we think of just many things like that. But guys, witchcraft is actually a form of control and manipulation. It's trying to take our will, to use spiritual forces to do our will. Okay, that's part of witchcraft. It's also control and manipulation, often coming from leadership. Another, God's definition of witchcraft is, there's a story in the Bible, okay, where God commands, I think Saul, he gives him very specific instructions in the book of Samuel. And Saul disobeys. And God tells Saul that his disobedience from doing his will is as the sin of witchcraft. So guys, the way that God defines witchcraft is actually going against his will and doing our own will. That is witchcraft. That's how the Bible defines witchcraft. But it can also be control and manipulation, and even using scripture or using spiritual forces to do our will. So, now that we've established that, I just want to tell you some things that happened to me. Okay, I went to a church service one day, and, I had been experiencing a lot of very strange things, demonic things, and I had been praying and praying that God would deliver me, and, I was at a place where He was showing me a lot of things, like a lot of things. And there was even times whenever I prayed that God would just send somebody to help me. God, just please send somebody to help me through all this. Well, anyway, this man came to a church service one day, and, I was listening to him speak, and, he was talking about how he was a missionary. He had gone to Haiti, and just everything that was coming out of this man's mouth just, he just seemed like he was just saying all the right things. I couldn't pinpoint any one thing that he said that raised any flags or anything. I noticed his demeanor was really strange. Like, he was saying all these things, but it was just like he wasn't. It was very weird. There was something very strange about everything. Well, anyway, the man stands up in front of the pulpit, and, he says, is there anybody, he said, there's a lot of people in this area that have been experiencing the demonic, and, if there's somebody here right now that has been experiencing this, I encourage you to come up for prayer. And he's talking about how other people in the area have experienced certain things, and, he's inviting anyone who has experienced this for prayer. Well, immediately I start crying because, I think, God has just answered my prayer, and I thought that this was an answer to prayer. But guys, the truth is that God was helping me. He was helping me. He was the one showing me things. He was the one who was really helping me through everything. Well, anyway, I went up for prayer, and this man, he put his hand on my head, and he said something about negative thoughts. He said, he just said something about me having negative thoughts, okay? And guys, I hadn't had any negative thoughts. As a matter of fact, I was doing really good spiritually. Jesus was showing me a lot of things, and, you know, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Well, anyway, he had someone, I think it was a friend of his, that was sitting down in the pew, and his friend stood up and put his hand, he asked me if there was any area in my body where I needed healing. And I said, well, I said, I have a mild thyroid issue. And, next thing I know, the man puts his hand on my belly, okay, on my stomach. And he starts rubbing his hand across my stomach. And he says, do you feel that? Do you feel that? He kept asking me if I felt that. And I didn't feel anything. And, it wasn't because I don't have any kind of faith, which is what some people will tell you. Oh, you don't have faith because you don't feel anything. A relationship with Jesus isn't about feelings, okay? Anyhow, he starts putting his hand on my stomach and, just, you know. Anyhow, he said, well, you know, since I was talking about my thyroid issue, he said, well, here pretty soon you're going to start losing weight because of your thyroid. And I was like, well, okay. Well, anyway, the whole thing just kind of struck me as odd, I guess. And the thing is for all I know, these men could be from God. But everything was just very strange to me. You know, I mean, I believe in laying hands on the sick, but just there was something about this whole service to me that just seemed odd, and that's just me talking, okay? Anyhow, guys, a few days later, negative thoughts start bombarding me in such a way that I didn't want to get out of bed. I started having suicidal thoughts. I started just literally just... It's like just constant barrage of negative thoughts just coming against me, and just, it was bad. It was bad, guys. I can't even begin to explain just how low how low the enemy brought me in a matter of days. A few nights later, I was laying in bed, and I felt like I was half asleep, but I was awake in a way. It's like I knew what was going on. I knew that something was going on. I was just laying there, and all of a sudden, I felt like claws were ripping apart my belly. They were ripping apart my insides. Like they were just... And I felt an excruciating pain in my stomach, like nothing I have ever known. And as this was going on, I felt like there was just a demonic force just holding me down, and just like I was just I wasn't even sure if I was awake or asleep, but I was aware of something spiritual going on. Anyhow, I had this dream. It was kind of like a dream that I walked down to the computer, and as I began to type, I began to expose the enemy. Like I was just exposing him through the truth. And I just felt my stomach just keep just ripping open. And so I woke up the next morning, and it was a very bad experience. It was extremely bad, and I just started fasting and praying and just asking God for the gift of discernment, because I couldn't handle what was going on. So guys, I just started getting on my knees, just saying, God, you got to help me, because I can't deal with this. This is just too much. I can't. And so a few days later, I'm sitting, I found this bottle of miracle gel that was in the house. It says it was supernaturally charged, and it was a healing ointment. And I I saw this bottle of gel, and, you know, we've had it in our house for years and years, but I never thought anything of it. Well, for the first time, I saw it through the eyes of Jesus, and he spoke to me and he said, Rochelle, they are selling me for money. They're selling me for money. And all of a sudden, Jesus began to make me aware of how he is, you know, people use and manipulate people through money in the church, how everybody's just trying to get money out of people. And he led me, you know, to witchcraft in the church. I was on YouTube one night, and I watched a video by, it was the first video I had ever seen by Doug Perry from Fellowship of the Martyrs, and he was talking about witchcraft in the church. And he was talking about a story where there was a man, and he had attended this church or whatever, and the pastor was real manipulative, and he knew something wasn't right, and he wanted to leave. And he told the pastor that he was going to leave, and all of a sudden the pastor started rubbing the back of his neck, like just like that. And the guy's like, well, he asked the pastor, he's like, well, what are you doing? And the pastor said, oh, just putting on a string. And the guy said he didn't think anything of it, but a few nights later, he starts having this extreme pain in the back of his neck. Like extreme pain. Like really bad. And so he called his friend over. He called Doug over or whatever, and they prayed, and they got it off, and God showed them in their spirit that this pastor had used witchcraft to try to keep the man under his control. You know, obviously he was getting money from the guy, so he wanted to keep him on a leash, in a sense. So he literally put on some kind of supernatural, spiritual type string. And guys, I know some of this might sound strange, but if you have seen anything of the spirit world, then nothing is strange, okay? Anyhow, that kind of reminded me of the belly thing, when that man was rubbing my belly, and a few nights later, I just started having this ripping, clawing sensation in my belly. And the thing is, guys, is I don't want to speak against the men that were there, praying for me that day. But I do know, without a shadow of a doubt, that there are people out there who will say that they are from God, who will say that they love God even, but they're working against the kingdom of God. You know, as I was about to do this video, a friend of mine just happened to give me a book called He Came to Set the Captives Free. And it's about this girl that had gotten involved in witchcraft and Satanism. And she was talking about how Satanists would often attend churches. They would go and, you know, I've even heard that like witches and whatnot are actually sent into some churches to try to break up the body, to try to destroy people. And guys, that's really not far-fetched, because the enemy hates to see unity among people. The enemy hates to see people actually going and shining their light and shining their love. And the enemy will do whatever he can to break that up, to stop it. And anyhow, guys, I had written a very long blog post about this entire subject, you know, about how we see a lot of powers in our churches, and how we see a lot of things, but we have to be aware that not every power is from God. You know, we see it in the story of Simon the sorcerer. But right now, one of the things I want to talk about is how people use Scripture, and people are just manipulated in church. You know, guys, there's a verse that says, many people think, or God is talking to Simon the sorcerer, and he tells him, you know, the gift of God cannot be bought with money. The gift of God cannot be bought with money. And yet in our churches, we're seeing people selling the gospel. We're seeing people just trying to manipulate biblical language to try to get rich. And guys, that's not the will of God. Oftentimes, people try to use spiritual forces to get what they want. They try to use God as like a little cosmic genie and say, oh, God, I name and claim this. I name and claim that. God, that's trying to use God to get our wills done. That's manipulating spiritual forces, and that is not even trusting God with his own will. That is telling God to fulfill our will. That's not how it's supposed to work, and that is a form of witchcraft. Any preacher that tells you that you have to give, that if you don't give, you're going to be blessed. If you don't give, you're not going to be blessed, and if you're going to be cursed if you don't give. That's witchcraft, because Jesus says that we should never give out of fear, or we should never give out of compulsion. So anybody that's sitting there telling you that if you don't give, then you're not going to be blessed, or if it's witchcraft, guys. And they're taking verses out of context, and they're not telling you the whole story of what's going on. Often they'll take verses out of Malachi, to justify tithing, but they don't tell you the whole story about Malachi. The people of Malachi were cursed because they were putting sick and lame and wounded animals on the altar, and the tithe back then was used to help orphans and widows. It wasn't used to make people rich. And guys, there's so many, I don't know. It just makes me sad, guys. How God is being used today. He is just being used and misused and misrepresented. And I started thinking today about a lot of the powers that we see in church, like powers. There's I could talk probably for hours on this subject. I've mentioned this in so many other videos about how there's a real power and there's a counterfeit. And oftentimes we'll see these supernatural things happening in different churches, and a lot of times people will run toward that. Like if they see supernatural things happening in Toronto, with the Toronto blessing or whatever, then they'll run toward that. And they'll think that that's revival. And then whenever they get over there, there's people just rolling around on the floor laughing or whatever. But guys, true revival begins in here. This is where true revival starts, is in here. You don't have to run over to some area where you think something's happening, because God wants to make something happen in here. And He wants you to take it to the people around you. You don't have to run off to different areas to experience God. And one day I just flat out asked God, I was like, Jesus, what why would there be, what would be the benefit of all these powers that we're seeing in our churches? Like the counterfeit version of it. What would be the benefit of that? Not the real version, but the counterfeit. It's like, God, how would you use that how would the enemy use that to his advantage? And Jesus showed me, people would begin to put all their trust in the one man. They would listen to everything that he said. They would think that God was moving so strongly, in their midst, that they would forget to read the Word. They would forget to seek Him. They would forget to do what the Word says. They would forget to seek God, and they would just base their walk with God on something that they were experiencing. Like it would be summed up in an experience. I've heard of people that have traveled far and wide just because they want to experience holy laughter. Not because they want to get close to God, but because they want to experience something. And if that's the case, guys, then we have the wrong motive here. We have the wrong motive. We need to be careful, guys. There's another little just brief story that I want to tell. One of my moms had a friend, and she had gone to a church service one night, and the pastor was saying, telling them that if she didn't give, then, he was basically saying that everybody in the church needed to give at least $1, and if they didn't have $1, then they needed to be ashamed of themselves. This lady literally did not even have $1. And so she couldn't give $1, but yet the pastor kept just, saying, if you don't have $1, then shame on you. And the lady felt ashamed. And she went home that night and she didn't, it may have just ruined her relationship with God. And what the man did to her was witchcraft, guys. He used fear and manipulation to get his will done. It's not God's will for us to fear. He has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, of love, and of a sound mind. It is His will for us not to fear when we give. We are called to be cheerful givers. And what this man did was use God as a tool to get what he wanted. He might have wanted something for his church. He might have wanted a raise. No, we don't do it like that. Anyhow, guys, just keep seeking God. That's all I can tell you. I might post the link here to my blog. I wrote something very detailed on this subject that probably has a lot more that I haven't covered today. And I know that a lot of you have already heard this before, but I just felt like God wanted me to make this video today about witchcraft in the church. And it's all around, guys. It's everywhere. Today I watched a video by Neptali 81, I think. And he was talking about how there's this famous preacher who's telling people that, if they send him a certain amount of money, then God's going to wipe out all their debt. And then he pointed out the verse that says, you thought that the gift of God could be bought with money. It can't, guys. You can't buy God with money. You can't buy... Guys, if you're in debt, God didn't put you in that debt. And He expects you to work hard to pay it off. That's one thing that He showed me. I used to have debt, and I used to have a thwarted image of God. I thought that if I went around planting little seeds, that God was going to wipe out all my debt. I really thought that. But as I got to know God, as I really just got to know Him, I learned that God wanted me to work hard to pay off my debt, because that's fairness. That is a just God. Who am I? Who is anybody to try to manipulate God? Who are we to do that? God has gifts and blessings for us, but a lot of times they don't come in the material. Jesus wants us, that's one thing that He has shown me, is they don't come in the material possessions. The true gifts from God are things that He puts inside that says, nothing on this earth matters more than you, Lord. Nothing. There is nothing greater. There is no material possession that even comes close to even knowing you. So that's what God taught me, guys. That's what He showed me. Another verse that comes to mind is give, expecting nothing in return. And the meaning of true prosperity, guys, you want to know the meaning of true prosperity? Look at the loaves and the fishes story. When we take what little bit we have and we share it with others, God takes that and He multiplies it. And it goes beyond ourselves. It goes to the people around us. We need to take our eyes off of ourselves, guys, and put our eyes on God. And anyhow, I hope this helps somebody out there. I know I wasn't very eloquent today, but I'm gonna be posting my my blog post, a link to it or whatever. Thoughts, comments, suggestions, everything is welcome. And I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.